Between January 1974 and September 1975, a knife-wielding stalker murdered 5, possibly 6 innocent men. Targeting gays in the San Francisco area, he would find his victims in bars, sketch them on a cocktail napkin, and after presenting them with the artwork and a proposition, leave the bar and proceed to murder them. Based on the differences in the murders, at the time, police thought they were tracking 3 different serial killers. It was only one, and he's never been found. Or has he? This is the unsolved case of the Doodler. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Podorf. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Everybody.
Yes, welcome.
I need to figure out how to do that in harmony with you or something.
I need to find some different languages to do it into.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Para mi Latino amigos, bienvenidos. There you go. There's one.
Rob was an exchange student.
In Jalapa, Mexico.
There you go. The only redheaded boy on the beach in Mexico year.
I was, true. Trust me, I was the ultimate gringo.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to like, rate, and review. That helps other people to find us.
Yes.
You can always join the Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. And this week, it's really important that you be a part of the In-Laws and Outlaws because this case, I'm going to be posting some stuff, and you can help be a crime fighter.
Nice.
Before I get started, I want to thank some sources. sfgate.com, ABC News, Channel 7, San Francisco, theall.com, the San Francisco Chronicle Doodler podcast, which is really, really good. I will have links to all of this, but especially that one. January 29th, 1974, the San Francisco Examiner, June 26th, 1974, the San Francisco Examiner, February 7th, 2019, the Sacramento Bee, July 8th, 1977, and the Times Standard, July 8th, 1977. I had to go way back into newspapers to find a lot of stuff. Here we go.
Let's do it.
So I want to set the stage for you. This is San Francisco, 1974. Nixon is resigning after Watergate. Muhammad Ali and George Foreman box.
I remember
it's
that.
called The Rumble in the Jungle.
Yep.
I remember hearing about this, but I was a tiny kid.
Oh, yeah.
Atari released a home version of the popular arcade game Pong. We had this in my house.
I had it.
It was so simple, too. All the older people right now, think about it, you'd like move the little cursor up and and it'd go.
I still remember.
Go to the other side.
Yeah, I have a picture at my graduation party at my house, high school graduation, and we were sitting there playing Pong, and it was the coolest thing.
Yeah, Pong. Isn't that hilarious?
Yeah.
Stephen King published Carrie, and the Sears Tower in Chicago opened as the world's tallest building.
Wow.
That's been blown away since then.
Yeah.
And the speed limit was changed to 55 miles per hour. It was imposed in order to save gas in the United States.
Not to save lives.
Not to save lives. We're just saving gas. Yeah.
We should be at 45 miles an hour right now.
At 35. In San Francisco, the Gay Pride Parade was only a couple years old, and it was called Gay Freedom Day Parade. It was the biggest they'd ever had. It was 60,000 people in 1974.
Wow.
And openly gay Harvey Milk is running for city supervisor for the second time.
Okay.
And since the end of World War II, the major port city of San Francisco had been home to a sizable number of gay men who had been expelled from the military and decided to stay rather than to return to their hometown and face ostracism.
Okay.
And by 1969, the Kinsey Institute believed San Francisco had more gay people per capita than any other American city, And in 2015, they still held that proud distinction.
Okay.
Now, when the Doodler's murders began, it had just been a year since the American Psychiatric Association Board of Trustees ceased classifying homosexuality as a disorder.
Oh.
Can you believe that? As I was doing
Wow.
the research on this, I mean, we've come a long way. I always say this, we've come a long way, still have a long way to go.
Right.
But just maybe a story about dead homosexual men, it wasn't that important to them at the time.
Interesting.
There could have been more victims than the ones we're going to discuss. There could have been less. It was hard to say that any one victim was or wasn't the work of the Doodler because this person has never been captured. The area was known as the Castro District and commonly known as the Castro. It's a neighborhood in Eureka Valley in San Francisco. The Castro was one of the first gay neighborhoods in the United States. It started out as a working-class neighborhood and in the 60s and 70s transformed into a prominent symbol of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender activism in the world. And by 1974, the Castro was for gay men a beautiful refuge from everywhere else.
Okay.
Quote, a clarion call went out in the underground network that San Francisco was the place to be, said Ron Huberman, the first openly gay investigator in San Francisco's district attorney's office, who arrived in 1975. The bar and bathhouse scenes were jumping. Harvey Milk had just opened his camera shop. It was a pre-AIDS wonderland. And other similar areas in San Francisco were Polk Gulch, a place known as San Francisco's premier gay male center in the 60s and 70s. It actually predates the Castro and hosted the first gay pride parade and the Tenderloin. And the name Tenderloin itself can be traced back to a New York police captain who once insinuated that he could afford a tenderloin steak because of all the bribes he extracted on his beat.
Oh, wow.
And many cities have their own tenderloins. I've got my air quotes up, known as areas of vice and illegal activity. These are the hot spots where gay men would hang out. It was a paradise for a killer stalking gay men. And here's how the Doodler would work. He was sometimes called the Black Doodler because he was thought to be an African-American man. The Doodler would hang out in gay bars by himself. He'd sit in the corner by himself, order a cocktail, and he would pick a victim. And then as he's sitting in the bar, he would sketch the victim on a cocktail napkin. I've had some of my best ideas on a cocktail napkin.
Was he an artist, though?
He is an artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, he's drawing stick men.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. I was like, was the guy any good? I mean,
he apparently was very good,
Okay.
which is why they called him the Doodler.
Okay.
But in my mind's eye, had an idea of a guy drawing a stick man and taking it over to somebody.
I made this for you.
Here you go. Yeah. But he'd sketch the victim, and according to everything I read, he was very, very good. Then he'd present the sketch to the victim, chat them up, flatter them, and convince them to leave with him for a sexual tryst, going to areas that were known as gay hookup spots at the time.
So basically, his doodling was kind of like his fisherman's bait.
Yeah, I guess the doodle's the worm on the hook.
Yeah. He'd cast it out there and see what he could bring back.
Yeah, I think that was his opening.
Wow.
You know, that was his line. It wasn't, hey man, what's your sign?
Yeah, exactly.
It was,
what's your major?
It was probably, and of course we don't know, but I mean, in my true crime mind and in the mind of a writer, it would be something like, hey, I've been admiring you from across the room.
Right.
So much so that I drew this for you.
Yeah, I made a doodle.
I don't think he's ever called himself the Doodler, but yeah, I drew this for you.
Yeah.
But that's where his name comes from.
Okay.
The Doodler.
Okay.
And here are his victims. Meet Gerald Earl Cavanaugh. Gerald's born in Montreal, Canada on March 2nd, 1923. He was a resident of San Francisco. He worked at a mattress factory. I also read that he was a furniture finisher. So maybe he was a furniture finisher in a mattress factory.
Look, that's not confusing.
I know, but I read both things. He was 5'8", weighed about 220 pounds. He was single and lived at 185 Belvedere Street. Gerald had never been married. Cavanaugh had left home young and did a 21-month stint with the U.S. Army at the end of World War II. He wound up in the Haight-Ashbury area by the 1970s, presumably to immerse himself in the sexual freedom that it provided. I think all of these men were drawn to this area because they could be themselves, obviously.
Sure.
His family was Catholic, and living an openly gay lifestyle might have been a problem for his family. We don't know that for sure. Maybe that's why he lived in San Francisco.
Right.
On the night of January 23rd, 1974, Gerald meets his death at the hands of the Doodler. At 1:57 a.m., Gerald's body is found at the water's edge on San Francisco's Ocean Beach, a place that was a common spot for hookups at the time. The 50-year-old Gerald had been stabbed multiple times from the front and the back, and his left hand showed a defensive wound where he'd tried to fight off his killer. He was wearing underwear, shoes, socks, pants, shirt, and a jacket. He had $21.12 in his pant pockets, and he was wearing a Timex on his wrist.
Got it.
He was stabbed 17 times.
Wow.
Gerald was stabbed 17 times in the chest, back, and stomach. And here's how he's discovered. A man calls the police and reports a body would be found on the beach minutes before it was discovered. So somebody calls and says, quote, "I believe there might be a dead person on the beach across from Azula Street. If you follow the street right down to the water," end quote. The caller told a San Francisco police dispatcher. He didn't give his name. He just hung up.
Okay.
And according to Gerald's relatives in Montreal, his sister came to identify the body, and it was so badly mutilated from all of the stabbing and the defense wounds that he was almost unrecognizable. The only police records on Gerald were that he'd been stopped by police, suspected of having sex in the restrooms known for gay hookups near the foot of Ulloa Street. And I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. It's Ulloa Street at Ocean Beach. If you're from San Francisco, send me an email and tell me how to say it, because I looked it up. I YouTubed it. I tried to find people from San Francisco giving out weird pronunciations, because apparently there are lots of things that are pronounced oddly in San Francisco that don't sound correct. Anyway, but I got a whole lesson on it, but they never gave how the pronunciation of the street.
Okay.
The anonymous call to police dispatch that morning, the one that tipped the cops to Gerald's body, came from a payphone at those very restrooms where he had been picked up before.
That's hinky.
It's thought that Gerald was conscious before his death due to the self-defense wounds, but other than how he died, not much else is known about the way he lived. And we're going to find that that's true of a lot of these victims.
Okay.
Meet Joseph J. Stevens, 27 years old and a rising San Francisco drag queen. Born in Texas, Jay worked at the P.S. Lounge in Polk Gulch and Finocchio's in North Beach. Jay is the summer replacement at Finocchio's. Finocchio's is an old-time club that had been around since the early 30s.
Wow.
It had once been a hot spot for the military and celebrities, and Jay was known as a bright, charming person who was a beautiful woman in drag. Jay was also a great singer, a great dancer, and a stand-up comic.
Oh, really?
He's a triple threat. I actually read that he was a triple threat. Bay Area reporter Don McLean wrote that Jay had a, quote, face that launched 1,000 sailors, end quote. Jay was known for wavy blonde hair, high cheekbones, and doe eyes. And Jay is known for doing an act of Julie Andrews. And Jay is not lip syncing.
Oh, wow.
Jay is actually singing.
Wow.
Yes.
So he had quite a vocal range.
Jay apparently is the shit. And I've seen tons of articles about this, and everybody loved Jay, thought he was an amazing act. But when he first appeared on stage 8 years before, he made a sensation in San Francisco as a stunning impersonator. That was according to The Advocate. Quote, over the years, however, he had moved away from the role of impersonating beautiful women and concentrated more on gay comedy, end quote.
Okay.
So he's just a great performer.
Yeah.
He also had an act called the Wonder Sisters. It's Jay, his sister Melissa, and a comedian named Steve Miller, and they actually had a gig scheduled for Boston in the very near future. On the 9th of June 24th, Jay is at the Cabaret Club on Montgomery Street in the North Beach neighborhood, and he's performing. But in the early morning hours of June 25th, his body is discovered beside a tree at Spreckles Lake by a woman who was out for a morning walk in the Golden Gate Park. He had been stabbed 5 times. He had been robbed, they think, because his pockets were empty.
Right.
And he had no identifying information on him. And I should say it was the same with Gerald. He had no identifying information on him either.
Right.
So the woman who discovers Jay at Spreckles Lake, she sees the body and calls another in the park, Warner Jepson, who is a composer. So this woman is in the park. Warner Jepson is in the park. They're both walking. Warner's out walking the dogs in the park, and Warner is actually the person who calls the police.
Okay.
So an unknown woman actually sees him, says, "Oh my gosh, there's a dead body over here," to Warner Jepson. And Warner Jepson is the one who's like, "Okay, I will call police." Homicide detectives Dave Toschi and Gene Fogarty are on the scene, and that's when they start questioning the neighbors. A woman who lived on Fulton Street at 34th Avenue told them that she heard male screams and cries for help at about 11:50 p.m. the night before.
Oh, okay.
A day later, clothing belonging to Jay is discovered in Golden Gate Park in a car that is smashed up in a Hayward police chase from the night of the murder. The car's driver was described as white, around 22 years old, and shoulder-length blonde hair. This person fled the scene. It's thought that Jay was actually driving the killer in this car.
Oh, wow.
And a side note about Jay, his sister, Alma Teresa Stevens, thought that, this is crazy, she thought that evil spirits had emerged from Jay's murder, and 3 months after Jay is killed, Alma dismembered their mother and burned her in the family fireplace.
What?
Then she took a sledgehammer to a sister's head. Now, the sister survived, and Alma ended up in an institution for the criminally insane, as you might after that. But soon after the sledgehammer and Alma's arrival at the mental hospital, their father burned to death in an office fire. Alma died in 2004, but the sister who had the act with him, she was the one who was hit in the head with the sledgehammer.
Wow.
She's still alive.
Okay.
But after Jay's death, everything fell apart in their family.
Yeah.
It was just a tragedy.
Sad turn of events.
Meet Klaus Christmann. Klaus is 31 years old and from Germany. He's an employee of Michelin. He left Germany looking for a new start, and back home in Germany, he'd managed a bar that catered to gay and straight customers. In April of 1974, Klaus flew to the United States, to San Francisco, to visit a friend, and he thought America was the place for him to have a new start and a new life.
Right.
At home, Klaus had a wife and 2 children.
Okay.
He'd been staying with Mr. and Mrs. Booker Williams and had been in the city for 3 months. So he left his wife and children behind, and he'd been in San Francisco for 3 months.
Okay.
And he's going to gay bars.
Oh.
On the night of July 6, 1974, Klaus was at the Bojangles Gay Dance Club in the Tenderloin. This is where he's last seen. On the morning of July 7th, the next day, he's found dead by Talba Weiss, who was walking her dog. Moondance. I thought it was interesting that they knew the name of the dog.
Moondance.
Moondance. Talba was herself a survivor of Auschwitz.
Oh, wow.
Quote, "The dog was running and I followed him. I knew something was wrong. I saw a man lying there and he wasn't moving. I knew he was dead," end quote. She went home and called the police. And I read where, I can't remember which source it was, but I read where someone was like, when they were questioning Talba, they were like, "Were you distraught? Were you shocked when you found him?" And her response was like, "A dead body is a dead body. I survived Auschwitz. I've seen lots of dead bodies.
Yeah,
this was a dead body." It was almost like nothing to her. I mean, she was sad that someone was dead, obviously, but she was not shocked.
Yeah, she had seen worse.
Yeah. Klaus's death was more violent than the previous 2. He'd been stabbed 15 times in the front and back in 3 different places, and his throat was slashed. He'd been nearly decapitated.
Oh, jeez.
And according to Inspector David Toschi, it was one of the most vicious stabbings he'd ever seen. And this time there's a lot more blood, and it was evident that there was a much bigger struggle this time. When Klaus is found by Talba, he's wearing a tan leather jacket, black side zipper ankle boots, which made me think, with Cuban heels, by the way. Okay. Black side zipper ankle boots with Cuban heels. Did you ever have anything like that, honey? Did you ever have side zip boots with Cuban heels?
I had side zip boots. I'm not really sure what Cuban heels are, though.
I think they're taller.
Oh, Well, I had stacks back in the 70s. I'm ashamed to admit. And a leisure suit, too. And silk shirts. I had the whole thing, baby.
Well, wait.
I was rocking.
So he's wearing these ankle boots with brown Cuban heels, a white Italian shirt, orange bikini briefs, one blue moonstone ring, and one brown cameo ring, along with a gold wedding band. Klaus also had a makeup tube in his pocket. It didn't say what kind of makeup it was, just a makeup tube. So I'm like, maybe lipstick? I don't know.
Well, I can honestly say I never had bikini briefs, let alone orange
ones.
Bikini
Yeah.
briefs. Yeah.
Ooh, baby.
No,
baby.
I was a tighty whitey.
Oh, please take that out. Take that out of the podcast. Please take that out.
I'm not going to now.
He's not a tidy whitey anymore. I've broken him of all his bad habits in the last 15 years. But he's got, I think, maybe lipstick. It just made me think he had a tube of lipstick in his pocket. And when Rob and I go places and I don't take a purse, like if we go to a big party or a huge black tie event or something and I'm not carrying a purse, what do I always make you put in your pocket?
Your lipstick.
My lipstick.
And every other thing that you're carrying.
No, maybe my phone.
Actually, when I go have a suit made for me, I have them put in extra pockets.
For Chris's stuff. Hey, why else do you have arm candy when you go to a black tie party unless it's to hold your phone and your lipstick? Am I right, ladies?
I'm not
right.
complaining. I'm not complaining. I'm just stating fact.
They know I'm right.
All right.
But just 6 months prior, Gerald Cavanaugh had been found very near where Klaus's body is found.
Okay.
And this is a place where the sand dunes and some cement structures and the crash of ocean waves, all of it would be really good cover for the killer.
Okay.
So Rob's always about the acoustics, and this guy actually picked acoustically preferable spot because the sand dunes and these cement structures, and over top of that, there's the crash of the waves.
Yeah.
It's all cover for him
exactly.
to kill.
Yeah.
Klaus is sent back to Bamberg, Germany to be buried. So we've had a Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
We've had someone from San Francisco that we actually know a lot about.
Right.
And now we have Klaus.
Okay.
Police now think these murders are connected. Gerald Cavanaugh, Jay Stevens, and Klaus. They've all been stabbed front and back and apparently all involved the victim meeting someone who suggested driving to a remote area at the beach or at Golden State Park. All had been stripped of their IDs, but lots of people think that the police were indifferent to the goings-on in the Castro, that the police didn't care about the gays, and they couldn't believe that they would just walk into a bar and take somebody home with them.
Right.
So the police are like, if you're like walking into a bar and just taking a random man home with you, maybe you just get what you deserve. And I'm thinking in my head, how many millions of men have walked into a bar and taken home a girl, taken home a woman?
What year was this?
1974.
Yeah, the whole attitude was totally different.
Totally different. And yeah, I mean, a pickup is a pickup.
Yeah.
A hookup is a hookup.
Sure.
And of course, we can look back on that now and say, yeah, whatever.
Right.
Have you ever taken anybody home from a bar? Oh, true confessions. Here we go.
I actually...
You ever picked up a woman in a bar, honey?
I never have. I honestly, I mean, I would say yes, in my stupid youth, but no, I never really did.
Yeah. Okay.
I was always too bothered with music and recording studios and everything else, so I didn't spend a lot of time in bars.
That's code for nerd.
Yeah, it was. I was a music nerd. If I had a guitar in my hand or a keyboard in front of me, I was doing that instead. I played a lot of bars.
Oh, there you go. So
Yeah.
you just had the girls fawning over you.
No, that was
Like you did your new guitar the other day. You just had girls fawning over, oh, yeah. Everybody loves a musician in the bar.
Yeah.
Everybody loves a musician in the bar.
Yeah, many years playing gigs.
But they just didn't seem to care about these gay men dying. And the San Francisco police, on top of all of that, they kind of had their hands full. And I read in the newspaper after Jay Stevens' death that Jay was actually the 70th murder of the year.
Wow.
And this is the middle of the year. And it was a time when the Zodiac Killer was out there. And there were usually around 130 to 140 murders
Good Lord.
each year in San Francisco.
Wow.
And right now, there's usually like 60, and that's way up right now in the year 2022.
And were those murders all in the gay community?
No, that's just all homicides.
Okay, all homicides.
Yeah, because they had the Zodiac Killer and the Golden Gate Killer, and they had all these guys out there. The 70s was huge for serial killers.
Right.
And, you've seen the memes where people are like, oh, I wish we were back in the 70s, back when it was so much safer to be out there. And then they show all the serial killers who were out in the 70s. But gay men came to San Francisco because they felt they could be themselves there. And in 1974, sodomy was illegal. Cross-dressing was illegal. Vice squads arrested men for being gay. And I think that the police were inundated with murder, and they put the murders of gay men on the back burner.
Right.
As opposed to like a little girl or a woman that's found. That's just my opinion. Yeah. There are a lot of people who would agree with that. There are a lot of sources that actually say that. I'm just saying it's my opinion.
Right.
But just like the Zodiac Killer, the Doodler is hunting his prey. He was on the lookout for his next victim. He was methodical. He was calculating. And the authorities just didn't know that yet. Meet 32-year-old Frederick Elmer Capon, born on February 20th, 1943 in Washington State. Fred is 6 feet tall, 148 pounds. He's tall and thin. Fred was a medical corpsman in the Navy and a recipient of a Commendation Medal for saving 4 men under fire in the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow.
He dragged 4 wounded Marines out of a combat zone while Viet Cong soldiers rained hell down on them. That's what I read.
Yeah. The kids during that time that went to Vietnam and war and all that, I just don't know how they got through it.
I don't either. I thank you to everybody out there for your service if you've served our country.
I'm a huge military fan.
Well, both of our dads were in the military.
Sure were.
But during the battle, friendly fire actually shattered Fred's lower left leg. He was flown home to Washington to recuperate, and there's a clipping from the Kitsap Sun newspaper, then the Bremerton Sun newspaper, which quotes him describing, quote, "We fought all night." And in a photo with the local paper, Fred has his wounded leg propped up, and he's in the hospital, he's recuperating, and he's actually painting a picture in this picture.
Oh, wow.
So was he an artist? Did the Doodler meet another artist and impress him?
Yeah.
Who could say? Fred is living with his grandparents in San Francisco at 3955 17th Street while he's attending school to be a registered nurse.
Okay.
On the night of May 11th, 1975, almost a year after Klaus is found, Fred is last seen at the gay bar Bojangles.
Okay.
The same place Klaus was last seen. And that night, Frederick was wearing a rainbow-patterned Picasso shirt and blue corduroy jacket, blue jeans, brown shoes, and blue underwear. I liked how they always said what they had on in the newspaper.
Yeah.
On May 12th, his body is found by a hitchhiker behind a sand dune between Vicente and Azula streets in the same Ocean Beach dunes where Klaus and Gerald had been discovered. He'd been stabbed in the heart, in the front and back, and there were marks where he'd been dragged along the beach. About 20 feet, and his clothes are soaked in blood.
Wow.
Now, Fred hadn't had the best home life growing up, and I read that he was actually a foster kid at one point. But after his discharge from the Navy, where he found his feet, he wanted to go to San Francisco and live amongst other gay men. But not long before he's murdered, he told his family that he was moving back to Washington because San Francisco was becoming too dangerous.
Gotcha.
Fred's body was sent back to Bremerton, Washington, to be buried. Now, the police are starting to ask questions and make connections. There were different homicide detectives working the different murders, but they were about to come together. There are 4 homicides of gay men who'd left bars to go hook up in areas alongside the water, and now they have witnesses who are coming forward to say, yeah, they've seen this sketch artist trolling in bars for gay men.
Okay.
Because the police didn't really go into the gay bars and say, hey,
right,
what's going on? Did you see him? And the gay men weren't that keen on talking to the police because they could be arrested for being gay. So there was just such a barrier there.
Right.
The police turned to homicide inspectors Rotia Guilford, San Francisco's first black homicide detective, and his partner Earl Sanders, a man who would later become San Francisco's first black police chief. They called them the Soul Brothers. And you have to love this because it's 1970. I've seen pictures of them. These guys were always dressed.
That's awesome.
They were always dressed, and they always had their ear to the street. And they knew all the criminals, the bar owners, the snitches, and they didn't care if you were black, white, gay, straight. They were getting the job done on the streets. They just didn't care. And you've heard of a man's man? Mm-hmm. Well, I read that these two were a cop's cop.
That's cool.
And it just makes me think, this needs to be a television series. Yeah. I would watch this on Netflix, Soul Brothers. I would absolutely watch this. I read where both of these guys played football in high school. They knew how to throw a punch. They wore sharp suits, hats, and ties. They were always dressed for success.
Wow, that's cool.
And these two are put on the Doodler case. There's no evidence at the murder scenes. The people didn't have a lot of family, and 3 of the first 4 victims weren't even from the Bay Area, Germany, Canada. And according to those who were there, the regular police didn't give a rat's ass. But Sanders and Guilford paid attention to what was going on. They knew the men in the gay bars were afraid. And less than a month after Fred's body is found, the Doodler strikes again. Meet 66-year-old Harold Goldberg, Harald. Harold is born September 11th, 1908, in Ekeby, Sweden.
Okay.
So another foreign person.
Right.
At 16, he forged papers to ship out as a merchant sailor. He made it his profession. He had tattoos on both arms. And according to immigration records, between June of 1930 and July of 1940, he stopped in lots of harbors, including Boston, Cuba, Shanghai, Melbourne, San Luis Obispo, Yokohama, and Liverpool. Now, during World War II, he got stuck in Shanghai under Japanese occupation, and the Swedish embassy gave him money, but after the war, the Swedish government wanted that money back, and they chased him for years to recoup $23,000.
Oh, wow.
He became a naturalized citizen in the United States on August 15th, 1955. Sometimes he stayed at a seaman's mission or a seedy hotel on 6th Street.
Okay.
And when Harold's body is found on the 16th hole of the Lincoln Park Golf Course in Land's End in San Francisco, he's found by a hiker 10 yards off the trail. And he's been dead for about 10 days to 2 weeks.
Wow.
He'd been slashed across the throat. His pants were unzipped and he wore no underpants. He's commando. Mm-hmm. Harold had cirrhosis of the liver and was covered in flies and maggots. That's how they know how long he's been dead.
Right.
Now, when I went to Writers Police Academy, I took classes from an actual coroner, a county coroner. And she talked about that's how they can actually date a dead body, is by the larva from the maggots. And she even talked about what it looks like. It looks like rice. Mm-hmm. This is going to gross everybody out. I hope you're not eating lunch and listening. But it looks like rice, but you can hear the maggots. They make sound.
I've actually watched some television documentaries on forensics where they actually take cadavers and they place them out.
Well, the University of Tennessee has a whole area of dead people out in the woods, and then they study the decomposition
same thing.
Of the body. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad I became a musician.
Yeah. I'll pass on the maggots, but I have seen pictures because when you take the class, they want to show you.
Yep.
But remember how Harold ran away from the Swedish government because they were trying to recoup their $23,000?
Yeah.
And he would stay at a seaman's mission or he would stay at a seedy hotel. When he died, he had about $250,000 in the bank.
What?
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
He saved his money all this time, all that working.
Wow.
He saved his money. He's 66 years old.
And
he's not paying back his $23,000 and he's living in seedy hotels.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Now this homicide, the homicide of Harold, is handed over to Guilford and Sanders. After all, they're working on the Fred Capon case too, and it all fit. Gay male, killed with a knife, found at a sex hookup site.
Right. And
Guilford and Sanders go to all the gay bars and they hear the same story. A smooth-talking sketch artist was picking up men by doodling their faces on a cocktail napkin and then leaving with them.
Right.
And around the gay bars, they were calling him the Doodler, and that's where his name comes from.
Gotcha.
It actually comes from the men in the gay bars who were like, this guy is like doodling faces and people are leaving with him, and then they're never seen again.
Okay.
The problem is no one can give a good description of him, but then something happens. A handsome man, a mysterious man they called the Diplomat, was a regular in the gay bars in San Francisco. He had an accent. Nobody seems to know what this accent was. But in July of 1975, just a month after Harold's body is discovered, the Doodler meets the Diplomat at the Truck Stop, which is a late-night diner on Market Street. You just laughed.
Well, it just the Doodler met the Diplomat.
The Doodler met the Diplomat. It's all so covert.
Yeah.
The Doodler meets the Diplomat at the Truck Stop. It's a late-night diner on Market Street. It was where gay men gathered after the bars closed at 2 a.m. The Diplomat was supposedly a European diplomat assigned to the United States, and while he's having a midnight snack at the Truck Stop, the Doodler apparently asked him if he had any cocaine. The Diplomat took the Doodler home to his apartment at Fox Plaza, just a few blocks down Market Street. And when the Doodler asked to use the restroom, he says, I got to go to the bathroom. The Diplomat turned his back. And when the Doodler comes back out of the bathroom, he said, quote, "You guys are all alike. I've had other people I've done this to before, and I enjoy this. Your anguish and pain and everything else is something I enjoy." End quote.
Wow.
Now, the Doodler rammed a steak knife into the Diplomat's back 6 times.
Wow.
And I read that and I thought, he ran into my knife. He ran into my knife 10 times
exactly.
from Chicago.
He didn't learn the first time and kept doing it.
But the blade broke off, and the Diplomat threw the Doodler against a wall, and the Doodler runs off. And the Diplomat survived the night. But he said it, "You guys," meaning gay men, "you guys are all alike." So now they know this is a guy who has a vendetta. He's got it out for gay men. So he's not having sex with them. He's just killing them.
Yeah.
Then a week and a half later, the Doodler goes to the same swanky apartment complex, Fox Plaza, only this time he's with a well-known entertainer who has always refused to be identified. The Doodler had him tied up and was ready to stab him while repeating the same line about all the gays being all the same. But the man, this well-known entertainer, he screams so loudly that the neighbors on the same floor start to pound on his walls.
Oh, wow.
Like, shut up in there. Shut up.
Stop being murdered.
Yeah, don't get murdered. And the Doodler gets spooked and he gets away. And then a third attempt, only this time it wasn't a well-known entertainer. It was a well-known actor. And as the story goes, these two were about to go to bed when the actor sees a knife fall from the coat of the killer, the Doodler, and the actor makes a run for it. So we have the Diplomat, the well-known entertainer, and the well-known actor.
Wow.
Now, 2 of the men lived at Fox Plaza. They both filed police reports, and Guilford and Sanders tracked down the actor. No one has been able to pin down who these men really are. Apparently, 2 of them are still alive. 1 has passed away.
Okay.
But finally, the police have 3 men who can now give a description, right? Not so fast. All 3 of them had reputations to protect, and all 3 refused to testify if police could find a suspect. And Harvey Milk even weighed in at the time by saying, "Yeah, I get it." And I'm paraphrasing. He had like a whole sentence. He had a whole thing saying, I get it. There's a reason why. They're afraid to come out. You can't hold that against them.
Once again, it's the 70s.
It's the 70s.
Yeah.
Still, there are no records, no public records about who the entertainer or the actor were. And the Diplomat, 48 years later, nobody can remember or will remember. And the one thing these 3 men did give was a matching description of a suspect. And in October of 1975, police had a composite. And I wrote in my notes, the Doodler had been doodled. He was a black man between 19 and 23 years old. He wore a black knit cap. He had a slim face with high cheekbones, wide-set eyes, and a, quote, calm cast to them, meaning his eyes, end quote. And police started looking for him everywhere. And when Officer James Bowles sees a man matching the composite walking down Castro Street, he thinks it's odd. He thinks it's hinky. It's November 20th, 1975, and Officer Bowles thinks he's got the right guy. He stops him. He frisks him up against a wall and finds a sawed-off baseball bat and in his pants a curved knife. So he had like a sawed-off baseball bat up his sleeve, and in his pants he had a curved knife. He books him. And when he does, he finds a pawn shop slip for a watch that had once belonged to Fred Capon, victim number 4.
Yeah.
And the man Officer Bowles arrested that day, he was a bad guy. He had a rap sheet including robbery, burglary, and prison time, but he was let go because he had zero artistic abilities and he had alibis for being in other places when the murders happened.
Oh.
And as for the watch, well, Fred had been robbed before he was murdered. Possibly. And maybe that's why he told his family, I'm coming home.
Gotcha.
So that whole scenario sort of plays out. So still no Doodler. Police released the sketch to the public in October of 1975. 15 more guys were hauled in for questioning. None of them panned out. And it was hard to pin down anyone since the 3 men who could ID the killer refused to do so. But then a woman called into the police station and said she knew of a guy who looked just like the sketch and he lived in East Bay. And the phone call went into just a large pile of whatever.
Right.
It got lost.
Right.
But the woman called back a couple weeks later and said, look it, I sent you a tip. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Like, nobody's shown up. And she gives the police a car tag. She provides a license plate number for this person. Then another phone call comes in. A secretary at a shrink's office calls to say that the same guy that they got the phone call about and who matched the car plates had told her boss, her doctor that she works for, that he committed 3 Ocean Beach murders that were credited to the Doodler.
Oh, wow.
3 more days pass, and the psychiatrist himself calls the police. His patient was fighting his self-loathing for being a homosexual, and he blurted out that he was involved in the Ocean Beach murders. Then Officer Sanders calls the guy up. Officer Guilford sees him in person, and the suspect admitted that he was struggling with his sexuality, but that the doctor had cured him. And now he had himself a nice lady friend.
Okay.
It's 1975. And Sanders and Guilford go to the psychiatrist and they think they're about to solve this murder, but none of it came to fruition. And this is kind of a 48-year-old mystery. The Soul brothers never put in their paperwork why their findings didn't turn into an arrest. And the only thing that they have is the name, Dr. Priest.
Okay.
And they shelved the whole case.
What?
Yeah.
Why'd they do that?
Don't know. No, it's a 48-year mystery.
They just didn't want to do it.
Either that or they got close to somebody who was so powerful that everything got dropped.
Right.
And that happens, you know?
Yeah.
In 1977, police tell the public that they've had a person of interest that they've been interviewing for over a year, but they were questioning him about 14 murders and not just the 5 or 6 dead gay men that they had on record.
Right.
And all of this came up again because Redondo Beach men were picked up in Riverside, California for questioning, and they bring their person of interest back in again, who talks and talks. But according to newspaper articles, he always stops short of admitting to murder. So they're bringing in all these suspects.
Right.
And they call him a person of interest because they can't call him a suspect, but they bring him back in and he'll chat and chat and chat, but he always stops short of admitting to being a murderer. Then in 1978, police and the LGBTQ people weren't on the best of terms. And when Harvey Milk is assassinated, the trust is just gone between the community and the police. And then it was AIDS that ravaged the community. And suddenly the Doodler was just not high on the priority list.
Right.
And here's the kicker. And the reason I'm doing this podcast is because in 2022, this suspect is still alive and they believe living in East Bay, but police won't release his name because he denies being the killer. And Sanders and Guilford are now dead. And the cold case is now on the desk of San Francisco Police Department Detective Dan Cunningham. And he's still looking for this Dr. Priest, who is thought to be a Dr. Preece, Preece.
Gotcha.
But Dr. Preece died in 2005, and according to his daughter, he fit the type of doctor that would have worked with someone like the Doodler. Among other things, he treated inmates at a state prison.
Gotcha.
But Detective Cunningham has this thought. The suspect that he thought had gone to the shrink to change his homosexual ways, and now he had a lady friend, remember?
Mm-hmm.
So was it a homosexual conversion therapy? And there couldn't be that many people who did that in the mid-70s. Or could it have actually been a real priest
Right.
instead of Dr. Priest who was doing the conversion therapy?
Ah.
But they don't find anybody. But there are priests who did this at the time. The records are just terrible.
Right.
Nothing's computerized.
Right.
Everything was by hand. And I even read where the Soul Brothers would sometimes just write things down phonetically for themselves in their notes.
Right.
So priest, maybe it was Dr. Priest. It's just very blurry.
Right.
And because it's the 70s and everything is done by hand and not computer, as they start sifting through all the old files, the police think that there was a sixth victim. They start piecing things together through these handwritten files. A man named Warren Andrews.
Okay.
Warren was probably gay. He was assaulted at an outdoor hookup spot at a thick forested area of Land's End. But this time the body wasn't stabbed front and back with a knife. At least no knife was ever found. So they think he went for his knife, lost his footing, and then killed Warren with a rock. But Warren Andrews wasn't dead when they found him. Not yet.
Okay.
In April of 1975, Warren was a 52-year-old single attorney. And after the attack, he was in a coma and died 2 months later. But at the murder scene, there was a bloody rock, a branch, and a blood-spattered handkerchief. And maybe, just maybe, the killer / Doodler used it to wipe his own blood. So they don't know whose blood is on this. And police think, maybe we found our killer. But here's the problem. In 1974, they stored and bagged and tagged things differently than they do today. No computers, just completely different procedures.
Right.
And Warren Andrews was assaulted, not murdered. So they didn't even know at the time if any of these items were kept for evidence or if they're still around.
Right.
But I think they are, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
But hold that thought. When Warren died 2 months later in Seattle, he took with him any information he knew about his killer to the grave.
Right.
And back in 1975, Guilford and Sanders were pretty sure they had the right guy. They were pretty sure they had the killer. But in late 1975, they didn't have enough to arrest him. He remained just this person of interest. And they know that this particular person of interest took a long trip through the South to the East Coast and the Midwest. So they sent word out to the FBI. Are there any unsolved cases out there during this time period with similarities to the Doodler? And there were some hits, but nothing really to go on. But the FBI to this day continues to follow up on lots of leads. They also know that 48 years later, the person of interest looks like the aged version of the police sketch. Police say that there are others who also look like the police sketch.
Right.
This person of interest has always denied being the Doodler, and there have been calls made into the FBI and to the San Francisco Police Department saying that they know this person, that they know he is the Doodler, and not to mention the diplomat and one of the other gay men who got away, the prominent actor at the time, are still alive, but they refuse to come forward to this day to be outed as a gay man.
Really?
To this day, 48 years later.
Wow.
I read where the reporter who did the extensive podcast basically asked the police department now, they started like giving out names. Was it Rock Hudson? Well, you know, was it this person? Was it that person?
Right.
And the police officer replied, the detective replied, Cunningham said, it was a time when it was a cheap flight between LA and San Francisco.
Ah.
So LA actors would take a quick flight up to San Francisco, have a little tryst, fly home.
Right.
No one was the wiser.
Right.
In January of 2022, San Francisco Police Department came forward and said they were, quote, close, end quote, to making an arrest in this case. They've been searching for the lost articles from Warren's murder, the handkerchief,
right,
and now they've upped the reward from $100,000 for information leading to an arrest to $200,000 leading to an arrest.
And they've got no takers yet.
Not yet. According to the news reports in San Francisco in January of this year, 2022, they have DNA.
Uh-oh.
So did they find the evidence from 48 years ago? I mean, they're being pretty close-lipped because this is an open investigation.
This has got to be somebody of high importance.
Well, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't think the person of interest is of high importance. I think the actor, the diplomat, the people who are alive and still refuse to come forward and say, yeah, that they were they were a victim of the Doodler.
But if they've got DNA and they can attach
The DNA could attach him to Warren. That's the only place there was DNA left behind.
Oh, so the blood wasn't from the Doodler.
We don't know. It's an
Okay.
open investigation.
Okay.
All we know is they have DNA. That was the report in January of 2022.
Okay.
They have DNA. But they do have fingerprints of this person of interest, and I'm pretty sure they have saliva from this person of interest.
Okay.
And there is an updated sketch of this person of interest.
Okay.
I will post it all in the In-Laws and Outlaws. There is a phone number if you've seen this man. I mean, we get to be like America's Most Wanted this week.
Yeah.
If you've seen this man, there's a number to call. There's a tip line for it. He's African-American, 5 feet, 11 inches.
Okay.
I'll post the picture. Maybe you know the Doodler.
Did you ever see the, it's on YouTube or somewhere, but it's a anchorman correspondent kind of thing. And he's talking and they have a police sketch and they put the police sketch up behind him on,
Yeah.
and it looks just like him. I'm like, that's very unfortunate.
Or fortuitous, who could say?
Yeah, exactly.
Who could say? But I will post that in the In-Laws and Outlaws. Maybe you'll get to help solve a crime this week.
There you go.
But that's the story, the ongoing story of the Doodler. And that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
So it's an ongoing case.
Yes.
The Doodler.
And you could help catch him.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe get that $200,000.
$200,000. That's the going rate right now.
And we only take 15% of that for turning you on to the whole thing. Is that all right?
We take nothing.
Okay. All right. What do you say? Let's do a little bless your heart.
Let's do it.
Well, bless your heart.
So here we go. Man with warrant gives fake name, arrested on warrants for fake name.
Okay.
Yeah. A game warden in Texas stopped a pair of men fishing without a valid fishing license. One of the men didn't have proper identification. According to the Houston Chronicle, the man without the ID knew he had active warrants for his arrest.
Oh.
Yeah. And in an effort to deceive the law enforcement officer, gave the warden the name of a friend. Here's where it goes
That's
south.
not very nice.
Well, here's where
You're
it goes-
giving your name of a friend?
But here's what happened. As it happens, the man whose name was given to the warden also had warrants for his arrest. So despite his attempt to dupe the warden, the man was taken into custody anyway.
Who's he hanging out with?
Well, that's just called a really bad day.
That's a really bad day.
Yeah, while he was being booked into jail under the false name, the man admitted to his lie and booked under his real name with additional charges of lying to a police
Oh,
officer.
yeah. Can't do that.
Yeah, so I guess the thing here is that if you've got warrants, just fess up to it because you're not going to get out of them.
He was just going for a night. Was he fishing? Is that what you said?
Yeah, they were.
Just out for a nice day,
Yeah.
going fishing, ended up in jail. And he outed his friend, too, because they went and picked him up, too.
Absolutely.
Talk about throwing somebody under the bus.
that was pretty bad.
That's really bad.
So there's your bless your heart. for
Bless
this
his
week.
heart.
Yeah.
Well, if you got to bless your heart or somebody whose heart needs to be blessed, You can send it to me, Chris, at hitchedtohomicide.com, or you can go to the website, hitchedtohomicide.com. There's a little pull-down menu. Go in there. You can suggest a case.
Yep.
We're getting lots of cases suggested.
Yeah.
And you can also make a suggestion to bless someone's heart.
Absolutely.
That's all we have this week. That's my husband across. That's my handsome ginger husband across from me.
And that's my beautiful blonde bride.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.